During the opening credits, we hear talk of something awful happening at a house. Then we see a man arriving. He talks to someone on his phone while he walks toward it. Soon enough, he hears an odd sound, which makes him tell the person he will call back. He cautiously enters the house, and the scene cuts off. Next, we see a detective at a store buying wine. He gets a call from someone telling him they need immediate assistance. So he arrives at the house we saw the first man enter. There the man startles him with his presence. He tells the detective, Mark Lewis, that there is blood in the house. Mark tells him to stay there while he checks it out. As he walks in, he yells that he's the police. He soon discovers a lifeless lady, making him call for backup. Another such body is found seconds later. Continuing his search, he breaks through a door where another person lies. Mark starts using his radio, and the man gets up to push him down. He starts running away, yet gets chased by Mark. The detective comes to him, telling him he's okay. 1 week earlier, we see 3 people sitting in a room. One guy asks another about him having visions of a lady. He wants to know who the lady is. The one being asked says it's his mother. She lost her life a few years ago. He keeps seeing her in a house, but he's never been inside it. His vision started a few months ago. The man is John. Once the name Brian gets mentioned, John storms out of the building. The girl, Michelle, comes out to stop him. We find out Brian is her ex-boyfriend from 3 years ago. Michelle lets John know that she would have told him, but needed to know if he would still come. The other guy, Sam, also comes out to say that John's visions will not go away until they go into the house. He also says the house haunted his mother and is now haunting him too. When Sam leaves, Michelle wants John to try it. In the next scene, Mark comes to sit with John, who asks the detective if he found Michelle yet. Mark tells him he did not, to which John replies that someone took her away. Mark wants to know who that is, but John starts rambling about something else. Then the detective lays down several photos, asking John to say who's missing. The man says it is Brian Purcell. Mark questions if Brian took the lives of his friends, and John says it was the house that did. It did something to Brian. He wants to find Brian before he hurts Michelle. The scene shifts to a lady in her house. Mark calls her, informing her he has a triple homicide at the Livingston house. She thinks it's a copycat crime. However, Mark tells her what John told him, that they woke the house up. To such information, she says she's on her way. Back in the recent past, we observe the group of friends gathering near their car. Brian films them, especially Michelle with John. After that, the lady Mark called comes to him. He brings her over to John and introduces her as Dr. Elizabeth Klein, a psychologist. The doctor starts talking to John alone. He tells her Michelle called a certain activity, hunting ghosts with her friends. Elizabeth asks him to tell her something he remembers. Following those words, we see the group recording themselves at a gas station. John says the house they're going into is in a small town where his mom grew up. There was an incident there 25 years ago. It was called the Martha Livingston Murders. Eventually, the crew comes to the house with a lot of equipment. They want to summon spirits and use only good energies to do so. Elizabeth tells John they went to do a seance there. Martha also did a seance all those years ago. She concludes by saying someone intended to repeat the murders in the same way. However, all John replies with is that he wants Michelle found alive. We see the crew break some chains to get inside the house. When they enter it, John gets a nosebleed, something he says he never gets. Jules says she's seen that happen when spirits are around. To that, Brian taunts John for being a newcomer. At that point, John tells Elizabeth that his mother was inside the house on the night of the murders. He did not tell this to the group, or even Michelle. Elizabeth tells him this information will not look good in court. John says that all he can do is tell the truth. Inside the house, Donnie breaks something, causing Jules to say she has to tell Brian about it. The crew starts setting up cameras in the house. In a certain room, Jules sees an upside-down cross and corrects it. Donnie calls her to say he's not getting a feed from the camera there, so she goes to fix it. After that, his computer displays the cross returning to its previous upside-down position. While Michelle films, we see someone in the dark behind her. At present time, Mark watches footage of Sam talking to the camera, saying that someone has gone crazy with an axe. He is taking everyone's life. Shortly after, Mark and other officers witness Sam losing his life on camera. Mark comes to collect the doctor from John. She tells him John's mom was the lone survivor of the Martha murders. Back at the house, Michelle is alone with John in a room. A door suddenly slams shut, making them believe someone is messing with them. Jules enters to witness another door opening. She takes the camera and walks with it through that doorway, asking the spirit to show itself. Soon after, Michelle yells that something just touched her leg. Later, Mark comes to John, questioning him about where Michelle is. After saying he doesn't know, Mark shows him a picture of a bloody area that he thinks Michelle tried escaping through. Mark accuses him of ending the whole group, as Martha did. However, John tells him he would never hurt Michelle, adding that she was 10 weeks pregnant. Elizabeth comes to him to say Mark thinks he took their lives, but she does not think that. At the house, John touches a ballerina figure, making it activate. Brian comes in to give him an attitude again by saying not to touch anything. He then investigates the figure with Donnie. The latter puts it back to where it was before John moved it, which causes it to activate again. Brian says the figure is resetting, yet John says she's pointing somewhere. He believes it's at the rug, so Jules uncovers the rug there to reveal nothing. To that, John states it could be another rug. Following that, the group goes into another room to move a larger rug. Once they do, a big symbol marks the floor. Jules informs everyone that it's a seal. She thinks it's the best spot for communicating with the other side. At that moment, John says nothing pushed Martha to commit those murders. She was already dysfunctional enough to commit them. Shortly after, they hear something that startles them. As they search for where it came from, another sound scares them. Brian slowly opens a door that releases several birds from its room. One of them lands on the seal. Back at present time, Elizabeth wants to know about Brian. John tells her he was obsessed with the house. We see Brian recording as he walks, until he spots a boy standing in the hallway, who instantly vanishes. In another room, Hans grabs Sam from under the bed. Terrified, he looks there to find nothing. While Jules records, she also catches something moving upstairs. It prompts her to search the upper area. While the others are experiencing paranormal activities, Michelle and John come to Donnie, who tells them about his highly sensitive microphone. Another device picks up the heartbeats in the room due to the microphone. Soon enough, the number of heartbeats goes from just the 3 of them to 7 or more. That is when Michelle gets scared by a face coming at her. She tells them about it. Afterward, fire instantly starts burning a painting. This causes John to quickly find a fire extinguisher to put out the flames. When the others rush in to observe what happened, Sam asks John how he knew where the extinguisher was. However, he doesn't know. That makes Sam ask him to describe what's behind him without looking. John describes it by saying there is a tear in the wallpaper that contains a drawing behind it. Donnie unravels the wallpaper, which confirms the truth of John's words. John also correctly describes another picture without looking at it. His third statement is that there is a woman behind Jules. As soon as he says that, Jules gets quickly dragged away. The group rushes to her, but she appears to no longer be threatened. With all that has happened, John decides they have to leave immediately. However, Brian disagrees with that. Jules also doesn't want to go. While John starts leaving with Michelle, Brian tells him he knows his mom was inside the house during the Martha murders. This leakage of vital information prompts John to explain to Michelle that such things should not be talked about. That is why he did not tell her. Brian tells John that what if his mother brought him back there to talk to him? If he leaves, his visions will just continue. Brian thinks John's mom is in the house. Therefore, he wants him to stay. Subsequently, Mark watches a recording of someone, but there is too much static to make out who is doing it to whom. Shortly after, he gets radioed that a certain vehicle was stolen. Mark wants an APB put out on that vehicle. Back at the house, John goes to the washroom to experience a bird coming out of his mouth. It turns out to be a hallucination. Later, the group sits surrounding the symbol on the floor while holding hands. Brian reads from a book in another language. Soon wine starts blowing, making Jules remark that it's working. Then Brian looks into the camera, which shows with infrared that other people are there. Michelle starts feeling a pain in her stomach. That soon grows. She yells in pain, and the lights flicker. A lady appears in Michelle's place to tell John to let go. It's his mother, whose face turns monstrous, causing John to let go. A lamppost outside lights up with fire. After the group experience that frightening event, they all start running out. John tells Elizabeth he tried to find Michelle, but it was dark. As he looks for her, he finds Brian looking at a picture. He mumbles to himself that everyone must lose their life. When John puts his hand on him, Brian screams. After that, the police discover the criminal was filming while committing murders. What allowed him to do that was his glasses, which contained a small camera in them. At that point, Mark tells another officer to go somewhere to look for the stolen vehicle. As John continues to search the house, Brian comes at him with an axe. He tells the doctor it was Brian, though he was possessed. With that information, Elizabeth comes to Mark and tells him the murderer is Brian. Since he has to leave, Mark tells her to make sense of a certain symbol from a book. Meanwhile, 2 officers locate Brian in a flipped vehicle. While one of them is away, Brian awakens to attack the other policeman. The possessed individual arrives at a store. Following that, Elizabeth calls Mark to inform him about the symbol. She says the one in the living room symbolizes a prison for demons. For a demon to be released from prison, everyone at the seance has to lose their life. Brian is trying to end everyone because of that. At that moment, we see Brian destroying a man at the store. Mark arrives there along with other policemen. One officer delivers a radio into the store for Brian to use. Over his radio, Mark instructs him to pick it up. Elizabeth comes to John, explaining the current situation to him. Since she has a radio on her, John takes it and demands to know from Brian where Michelle is. Brian picks up the radio to scream into it. That causes John to fly back. He starts having seizures. They won't stop, making Elizabeth urge Mark to do something before Brian destroys John with his screaming. So he shoots the possessed man. Coming to him, he asks several times where Michelle is. That is when the officer nearby shows Mark that Brian's tongue is missing. Afterward, Mark enters the house with the officers. He finds a small door in a closet. Going behind it, he discovers Michelle there, tied up. As he's tending to her, Elizabeth is shown footage of John's mom, saying that Martha wanted everyone to lose their life so she could be free. Before Michelle gets taken to an ambulance, she utters same room to Mark. Then Elizabeth comes to John, telling him it was he who murdered everyone, not Brian. She asks him if he wants to say anything before going to prison, and he tells her that he's not going there, he's leaving it. She tells him, however, his ritual did not work because Michelle is still alive, along with him. John tells her she is wrong. At that moment, we see Mark finding a lifeless John. A past event shows us John Before many birds fly out of his mouth, Elizabeth starts choking. The demon inside John tells her that John's mother was his vessel, but she escaped. Now Michelle is his vessel. When she crosses the seal in the living room, he will be free. Soon Mark comes to Elizabeth, who tells him everything. John is no longer there, and Mark informs her. She tries to show him on the camera that she was talking to him, though the footage displays an empty chair. The final scene has Michelle riding in an ambulance, where a paramedic listens to her baby. Following that, she tells Michelle it will be fine. Unfortunately for them, we see something move in her stomach.